So did you pick up Rico Dowdle and Michael Carter like we recommended? No? What about Darren Waller? Well, that's okay. Even if you didn't, we've still got heaps of great pickups available for the Week 6 waiver show on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. So we're talking waivers today, but if you've got any questions on trades or anything else about your team, make sure you hit us up in the comments below or on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. We'll also have our rankings up very soon over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. But let's get into the waiver wire stuff so you can get those waiver claims in as quickly as possible. Start things off with the quarterbacks, and Matthew Stafford's been great this season, and he gets an excellent matchup against Baltimore. We saw what CJ Stroud managed to do, and Stroud hasn't even been good this season. Stafford should be able to eat with Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams in there. Bryce Young's a good backup option if Stafford isn't available. Young hasn't been great this year, but he's had some good games, and he gets a Cowboys defense that is very susceptible to opposing passing. That's not to say the Panthers will necessarily win, but I do think that Young could have a good game. Mac Jones, meanwhile, was good last week, and he gets a top 10 matchup against the Buccaneers. He's a great guy to pick up. He's available in the vast majority of leagues. That's assuming Brock Purdy doesn't play, but it does look like we're trending towards Brock Purdy not playing this week. Finally, Sam Darnold, another okay pickup, takes on Jacksonville, which is a pretty solid quarterback matchup. He's someone available in a heap of leagues. If those other guys aren't available, he's someone you can pick up if you're desperate. Running back wise, and Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt is someone we talked about weeks ago. He's probably on rosters, but some people have started dropping him, and I think that was reasonable in shallower leagues. I'm still not sure that I'm really desperate to get him in some leagues. It doesn't feel like he's really still going to play an every down role with Jeremy McNichols around, but he has at least pushed out Chris Rodriguez to some extent. So certainly someone that's worth picking up, but I'm not spending a whole lot of fab on him because the upside is a little bit limited. Likewise, Woody Marks, even though it was disappointing this week, he actually got used in exactly the same way. He's still getting used in a committee with Nick Chubb, but it does feel like as the season goes on, he might take over. And we know that teams tend to make changes during the bye week. So this feels like a reasonable time to pick him up if someone has dropped him or if he's still available in your league and just see what happens coming out of the bye week. You could probably wait a week, but you're safer to get him and you're not going to have to spend up to get him this week because we might hear some news about him starting during the bye week. Zach Charbonnet has taken over the goal line work and is also the receiving back for the Seahawks. Now, Kenneth Walker isn't going to lose his job anytime soon. He's still running very well, but he is very injury prone, making Charbonnet also an upside pick. And with bye weeks around, I feel like Charbonnet is someone you can feel okay about starting in a desperate situation in the flex, especially in a PPR league most weeks, but particularly this week against the Jaguars because they do tend to allow quite a few checkdowns. Rico Dowdle was fantastic last week. I'm a little bit wary of picking him up this week. It does seem like Chuba Hubbard has a good chance of being back, but it is possible that Dowdle keeps a reasonable amount of the role. I still think he's worth picking up in this game against the Cowboys because if Hubbard misses it, then he could be in for a massive game. And even if Hubbard plays, he could be someone that it's okay to start if you're a little bit desperate. Meanwhile, if we go a little bit deeper, and Kendre Miller is starting to take over from Alvin Kamara, he's getting a lot more carries. He's still not getting the receiving work. That's where a lot of the value comes in that offense, but there's at least some upside that he could get that. And in the meantime, he's someone that you can start as a desperation option, especially in a non-PPR or half PPR league. He's someone that definitely should be rostered in the majority of leagues. At the moment, he's not. Michael Carter is someone I talked about in the waiver show last time, and I picked him up in a lot of leagues, and I hope you did as well. He gets another okay matchup against the Colts. He's clearly the early down running back. Demicado should probably continue to get the receiving work, and I do think we'll still see some Bam Knight as a change of pace back, but Carter is someone that you can use. He doesn't exactly have a lot of upside. He's not a Trey Benson or a James Conner, but he's going to go in as a running back 25 region, basically. So if you need someone that's better than a Patriots back, for example, or a Zach Charbonnet, then I do think that Carter will do in a pinch over the next 4 or 5 weeks. It's just that Benson is going to come back at some stage and take that role back. Kareem Hunt likewise has been the goal line back, just like Zach Charbonnet was. It's not as much upside in the Chiefs offense because of how they use things around the goal line, but did get him a couple of touchdowns this week. Is difficult to see him going well against the Lions, but they are consistently using him around the goal line, which means he has a lot more touchdown upside than Isaiah Pacheco, and he's someone that should be picked up in any league where Pacheco is being started most weeks. And finally, we do know that there is an injury to Marion Hampton. I do think that Hassan Haskins is someone you need to pick up. I know that it seemed like Vidal got a lot of touches, but that was mostly with the backups. It was Haskins that went in and played the vast majority of snaps until the backups came on, and then it was Vidal. So I do feel like Hassan Haskins is worth picking up. How much upside is there here? Probably not much in general, but against the Dolphins, that's one of the top running back matchups in the league. And I think that Haskins is someone you can pick up in any moderately deep league and probably feel okay about starting him next week, even though there is some risk. It's a similar situation to Michael Carter, where they kind of signaled what they were going to do. I suspect he's not going to be too active, and there will be a committee to some extent, but I wouldn't be spending up on Vidal. Haskins is the one that I would want. And then we go into waiver stash as well. We saw in the last week or so the importance of having waiver stashes with guys like Rashad White, guys like Rico Dowdle being picked up and used. If you just have them on your bench already, you don't need to worry about that. I had Rico Dowdle on 9 of my benches. I'm in 20 odd leagues, 20 to 25 leagues. And I had him in nearly half of my leagues and started him in a lot of those because he always had a good matchup and it was a good situation last week. That's the same reason you got to pick up these guys. Think about Tyler Algier, for example. If there's an injury to Bijan Robinson, all of a sudden, I reckon I'm rating Algier borderline top 12 running back, depending on the matchup, because they will use him pretty heavily as they do anyway. Plus, in a bye week, when they're favorite, he is someone that you can start. This is not one of those games against the Bills, but in games where that's the case, you can also get away with using him as a bye week fill-in. Blake Corum did have a big drop in snaps, so I wouldn't be starting him this week. But if there's an injury to Kyron Williams, it is pretty clear that it's going to be Blake Corum. And we know with the Rams using their running backs that they do seem to use them pretty heavily and they focus on the one guy. So I think it would be mostly Corum if there were an injury to Williams. That's what you're gambling on. Likewise, DJ Giddens coming in for Jonathan Taylor if there's an injury. I do think we see a little bit of either a Tyler Goodson or Amir Abdullah, particularly on third downs, if that's the case, which does limit Giddens' upside a little bit. But we know how much they like to run the ball in Indy, especially with Daniel Jones there. They don't want to give him too much to do. For that reason, Giddens is someone I've got in a lot of leagues. And finally, Ollie Gordon. He's been getting a lot of goal line touches, but that's kind of faded back towards Devon Achane. I do think there's an Achane injury, though, that it is going to be Ollie Gordon that's the clear lead back. And while he might not quite be a top 10 back, he's certainly going to be in that vicinity. Now, wide receiver-wise, and Juwan Jennings is being dropped in a lot of leagues. I'm not entirely sure why. There were people that were drafting him pretty early, and nothing much has particularly changed. Brandon Ayuk doesn't look like coming back anytime soon. Ricky Pearsall is injured. George Kittle's still injured. Now, Jennings himself is also injured, but he does feel like one who could come back sooner rather than later. And for that reason, I do want to get him onto my roster because there is plenty of upside, as we saw from Kendrick Bourne last week. Wan'Dale Robinson, likewise, is the clear number one guy for the Giants. And with Darius Slayton's injury, they don't really have many other guys at wide receiver. We're talking about guys like Jalen Hyatt, who's never done anything. It's more of a deep threat. Bo Collins, who didn't really even do that much in college. He is a talented guy. I had him in college fantasy and disappointed me regularly. But it's going to be Robinson. It's going to be the main guy. I think we'll see a lot of Robinson and maybe some Theo Johnson. And, of course, the run game. But in matchups like this where you can't really run the ball, I think we're going to see a fair amount of Robinson. He's definitely worth picking up, especially in PPR leagues. Romeo Dobbs is very good before the Packers went into their bye week. Certainly worth picking him up just to see what happens. He's a good start this week against the Bengals. Arguably, maybe could be ahead of Robinson on an upside perspective, and maybe Jennings for people that you want this week. Still available in a lot of leagues. Finally, Calvin Ridley. I'm not really excited about this one. He was a borderline drop for me last week, and not much changed except they actually started targeting him. That was really the only difference. His snap count didn't rise too much. He did seem to be injured towards the end of the last game, and that was enough for me just to go that I don't need this problem in my life. Having said that, he showed there's a little bit of upside there. He had the same issue last season where he started very slow and then started to get going. It is possible the same thing happens this season. So if you're in a moderately shallow to normal league, he's someone that probably should be rostered somewhere in there, but not above any of these other guys. And Trey Tucker, arguably, is someone I'm a little bit more excited about, even though he's available in deeper leagues. I do think there's some upside with the way they've started to use the rookies. We started to see a lot more Jack Beck and a lot less Dante Thornton, which means Thornton's arguably droppable now. I didn't mention him in my droppables later on because, frankly, he's not in enough teams. But it is Tucker that's the clear wide receiver too. And when you've got Brock Bowers out, that suddenly means a lot more than it did previously. It does seem like Bowers is going to miss more than just last week. So Tucker's a very worthwhile pickup. I think there are leagues where I would take him first above any of the other wide receivers we talked about if I need someone desperately for this week specifically. Troy Franklin, I mean, he disappointed a little bit last week, but he's still getting the snaps. He's still getting the opportunities. Pat Bryant's kind of coming at him a little bit, and we'll talk about him later on. That's a little bit scary, but Franklin's still someone I'm interested in. Darius Slayton is still a solid pickup, but with the injury over his head, that's a little bit nerve-wracking. He's someone that I'm picking up in a deeper league, but I'm not going out of my way to get him. He will be dropped by quite a few people, though, in those leagues after the injury, so just look out for him on waivers. Finally, Jalen Coker, not overly excited by this, but it does seem like he might slide in and be the wide receiver too. We saw Xavier Leggett score some touchdowns last week, but I don't know that he's going to have an actual role where he's getting targeted a lot. I think Coker comes in and could play that kind of Adam Thielen role from a couple of seasons ago. There's some upside there with that. So for that reason, I think it could be more McMillan and Coker than anybody else. And for that reason, Coker's someone I'm interested in having on my roster just to see what happens because he's available for free in the majority of leagues. And finally, super deep options. Isaiah Bond does not excite me at all for the Browns, but he is their wide receiver too. If you're in a super deep league, a starting wide receiver needs to be rostered on team. So if you need someone just for depth, he is someone that could have some good weeks. He started to get some targets, but just with the way this offense is looking, it's filtering so much through the running backs and tight ends that the wide receivers are a little bit of an afterthought. There is a hope that maybe next week in a pretty good matchup against the Steelers, that might change with Dylan Gabriel. If you're desperate for a starter next week, I think he's an option. Alec Pierce is also someone that at least has a little bit of upside on a weekly basis. More of a best ball guy, but Adonai Mitchell showed that he's not likely to be taking over Pierce's role anytime soon. We've seen a little bit more of Pittman in the pass game being better, but Josh Downs really is only playing on 3 receiver sets. So for that reason, I think that Pierce is someone that you can reasonably roster and feel okay about in a super deep league. He should be back hopefully this week. Isaac Teslar has finally become the clear wide receiver 3. He was splitting snaps with Khalif Raymond for a long time, but he is now clearly the number one guy. He scored a touchdown last week, which unfortunately means a lot of people are going to pick him up without actually knowing why, but he was legitimately on the field more. He's someone I'm very excited about in Dynasty and have been since the offseason. Don't know that I'm that excited in redraft leagues, but in a super deep league is worth picking up. As is Pat Bryant, who's someone I don't really love the talent of. I think it was a little bit of a reach on day 2. He has started to get used a little bit more. He's kind of moving ahead of Marvin Mims a little bit, which is disappointing for me because I actually like Mims a little bit more. If Bryant can continue taking those snaps and turn into an every down player in that offense, I feel like that's a situation you probably want to have a part of in a super deep league. Tight ends, meanwhile, and Darren Waller's the clear guy. I've been talking about this for 2 weeks. In fact, I've been talking about this since the start of the season, realistically. I think even before the season, Waller was someone I was ranking as a top 12 tight end at times. But in this situation now, his snaps have been rising. They've doubled since last week, and he's mostly being used on passing downs, but he will start to be out there a whole lot more, especially with so many other injuries going on with Tyreek Hill out. For example, he's someone that must be rostered, and for me, I'm going to be starting him as arguably a top 10 tight end this week and most weeks. David Njoku's still getting a lot of snaps, and with Dylan Gabriel out there, they used him a lot. It's hard to know if that will continue or if that was just try to get Gabriel into his first game, but the fact that it went very well and that he played well, to me, suggests they'll probably go back to doing it again. So Njoku is someone I would hold on to if I've got him, and if I don't have him, if I'm desperate for a tight end, then he's someone that's worth picking up. Dallas Goedert's really getting by on touchdowns, and I don't feel great about that. I'd rather have Njoku at least give you that PPR floor and the touchdown upside as well, rather than Goddard, who really needs a touchdown or he's going to bust. Having said that, he's better than most of the other guys available. Mason Taylor is going to be someone that a lot of people are going to flock to on the waiver wire, and I'm mentioning him here for that reason. I am a little bit nervous about how that all happened. It was nearly more garbage time than anything else last week. He's certainly getting used a little bit more, and I do like the talent. He was someone that I liked a lot in the preseason, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm that excited to get him on my roster when in a lot of leagues other guys are available. If you're in a league where Waller and Njoku and Goddard are taken, so you're in a bit of a deeper league, then he's certainly someone that's worth picking up if you can't get your hands on any of the top 16 or 17 tight ends. But it's kind of Mason Taylor and Theo Johnson who are option for this week, and Taylor's my favorite of those 2 options. I think Johnson was a little bit fluky in that production this week. I don't trust that to come back again, but he is also a viable, deeper tight end waiver option. Kickers and DSTs, Brandon McManus is back. He's a good option this week against the Bengals. Matt Prater has been just consistently solid in a high-scoring offense. The Falcons are very susceptible to kicking points, so I do think that Prater is a good option. Meanwhile, DST-wise and Packers against Bengals, anyone against the Bengals is a good option. And Rams against the Ravens, again, when Cooper Rush is in there, anyone against the Ravens, is a good option. Now let's talk about guys you should be dropping. Joe Mixon, I'm starting to give up on. With Woody Marks coming through, I feel like even if Mixon comes back, this is going to end up being a committee. Murray Demicato was clearly still just the third down back. He was not going to be anything else, and that's not going to change after that stupid mistake he made and getting absolutely blasted by the coaching staff. Tajay Spears, I know a lot of people held on to in his IR spot, and I think that was smart just to see what happens, and then had him for 1 week. He's still clearly behind Tony Pollard. I know that he will increase the amount of snaps he gets, but he's not suddenly going to become the number one guy anytime soon. He's droppable in the vast majority of leagues. Tony Gibson's injured. Some people picked him up after a couple of weeks of success. Chris Rodriguez stopped getting the starts last week with JCM getting them. I think he was borderline droppable anyway with that committee situation. Now he definitely is. And Jaden Blue got picked up with Miles Sanders being injured by a couple of people, but it's still clearly Javonte Williams. You need a Williams injury, and you need Sanders to stay injured for Blue to do anything. And even then, I just don't see it. Meanwhile, in shallower leagues, Jalen Warren looks like he's going to play this week, so keep an eye on that. And if it is clear that he is playing, then I think Kenny Gainwell is droppable in a shallower league. In a deeper league where the majority of handcuffs are kept, then I would keep Gainwell. And Bashal Tuden, same situation. In a league where most handcuffs are kept, then you definitely need to cap Tuden because he is a moderately high-valued handcuff. There's certainly a lot I'd like over him, probably 10 or so that I'd prefer, but certainly he's better than not having a handcuff there at all. But in a shallower league where most of the handcuffs are on waiver wires, think it was Trey Benson rostered before that injury happened, for example. That's kind of the sort of level we're talking about. If not, then you don't really need Tootin because you can't start him weekly. And there's more upside running backs around, probably in that league, like an Algier and all those other stash guys I talked about. Wide receiver wise, Malik Washington got picked up in a lot of leagues because of the Tyreek Hill injury. His role has not changed at all. He might get slightly more targets, but he's still just the 3 wide receiver set guy. The kind of the third guy in. They're not going to use him in an every down role. He's not worth picking up. Brandon Cook started to have an increase in snaps last week, and then it went away immediately. So those of you who picked him up can drop him again. Adonai Mitchell obviously got taken out of starting lineups, even with no Alec Pierce last week after his awful game. Marvin Mims, as we've seen, Pat Bryant's taking a lot of his snaps. He's droppable in pretty much every league. Kayshon Boutte, I don't know if this is an every league thing, but Stephon Diggs is clearly getting the targets. Boutte's out there, but I don't know that we're really feeling good about him. He hasn't been good the last 4 weeks. You can hold on to him, but for me, he's probably droppable. In a shallower league, Christian Kirk for the Texans, similar idea. He's out there an okay amount, but I just don't like what they're doing here. They're cycling everyone that's not Nico Collins and running the ball a lot. He's going into a bye week. I feel like you can probably find a better, more upside option, maybe pick him up later on. Certainly in a normal league, I wouldn't be dropping Kirk, but in a shallower one, you can probably do better. Keon Coleman, similar situation. He's just not out there playing enough. They're rotating all the wide receivers, and Khalil Shakir is really the only one with a consistent role. At least he always plays in 3 wide receiver sets. He's the slot guy. Everyone else is kind of cycling, like 5 guys being cycled around. It's very annoying, and I feel like despite the touchdown this week, Coleman is someone in a shallower league that you can think about dropping. Cooper Kupp, same situation. He's had some okay weeks, but in a shallower league, the upside's just not there. They're not passing the ball enough, and JSN's the clear number 1 guy. He basically needs a JSN injury to have a chance of becoming truly relevant, especially with AJ Barner being so heavily involved. And Marquise Brown, we do have Rashee Rice coming back soon. If you're not starting Brown this week, then there is no point having him in your roster because when Rice comes back, you're not going to start him at all. Quarterbacks and tight ends, Jackson Dart, I just don't see it with him at the moment. He was an okay start last week. He has a good rushing floor, but I think most weeks you're not going to feel good about starting him, and he doesn't have great games coming up. Same thing with CJ Stroud. He had a great game last week, but the next few games he's got coming up are bad matchups. I wouldn't start him in the majority of leagues, and I would be dropping him anything outside of Superflex League or a very deep league. As for shallow league quarterbacks, Jared Goff, I mean, last week was really the week you wanted to start him if you're going to start him, and he was still disappointing. I think he's droppable in the shallower league, as is Kyler Murray, who's just been mediocre throughout the season. Tight end wise, and Jonnu Smith, talked about this last week, they're just not really passing the ball effectively and cycling their tight ends a lot. It just means Smith is not trustworthy. He will have some big weeks. There will be some weeks where he's okay, but he's going to have a lot of weeks where he's scoring you 2 or 3 points, and that's just not something you can risk outside of very deep league. Chiga Conquo is losing a lot of snaps to Gunnar Helm. That's turning into more and more of a committee, and I just plain don't trust it. In most leagues, you can do better. And Evan Ingram's playing like 30 to 40% of snaps. He's purely the third down guy. We've been talking about this for weeks. He is droppable in most leagues. Finally, Zach Ertz in a shallower league, I'm thinking about dropping him. He's not been running even 30 routes the vast majority of weeks. Thought maybe when John Bates came back, they trust him more in 2 tight end sets than now that they had Bates in there to block, but that didn't really happen this week. So for that reason, Ertz is someone I would consider dropping as well. And that's all we've got for the Week 6 Waiver Wire show. Please hit me up if you have any questions on Instagram or on Twitter. Plus, make sure you go check out our website, ffdfantasyfootball.com. And as always, please like and subscribe on YouTube. I look forward to catching up with you guys very soon in a couple of days' time for our Streamers and Stasher show, and then the Start Sit show on the weekend. I'll see you then.